Best program in the Big 12, no doubt. Best team in the Big 12, probably assured for 2021 as well. But the best coach in the Big 12, working with limited resources, taking that into consideration, the talent base, the brand, the image, all of it taken into consideration in what the production is on the field. We will get my top 10 list and also hear from Jason Ray, who joins us on a regular basis to cover Oklahoma football. Jason, all right, I'm looking forward to this and hearing your top 10 Big 12 coaches. You can run them down. Are you going to go from 10 all the way up to number 1 here?
Yeah, we'll go from 10 to 1. Start at
Absolutely.
Okay, so at 10, it's pretty much a given. So right now I have Emmett Jones from Kansas as the interim head coach for Kansas. I mean, look, guys, we can. Whoever the Kansas athletic program, specifically the football program, is in shambles. If it could be any worse than what it was last year, it might be that way this year. Certainly not sure who they're going to hire, but whoever they hire as the head coach will certainly be at this 10 spot. Unfortunately for the Big 12, Kansas is probably the worst Power 5 college football program in the country right now. Doesn't do any favors for the rest of the Big 12 as a whole. So I'm putting either Emmett Jones or whoever they enter or whoever the full-time coach would be at number 10. And then at number 9, I have Matt Wells. Had a good career at Utah State. For Matt, had 5 bowl appearances in 6 years at Utah State. Hasn't been great thus far in his first couple of years at Texas Tech. A couple of 4-7 seasons. There's a lot of culture that needs to be changed at Texas Tech. Really, predominantly in a very, very much an offensive school and with defense optional. He played a lot better defense at Utah State. We'll see if he'll be able to pull that over to Texas Tech and change that culture. Then at number 8, Dave Aranda. First year is maybe a little bit unfair for Dave Aranda to be mixed in, from a rankings perspective. First year at Baylor, 2-7. The record was a little bit deceiving, in terms of that 2-7. Played Oklahoma extremely tough in Norman late in the year. Was a team that really they didn't get blown out at all. I don't think any of their games were more than 17-point spread until the very last game against Oklahoma State, when they were just decimated by COVID-19 situation there. So great defensive coordinator through the years at LSU. Obviously, had top 10 teams from a defensive perspective. So Dave Aranda there at number 8. Number 7, we have Neil Brown. Really did a great job at Troy overall, as we have here, 46-27. Was much improved last year with West Virginia. Got that win over Army in their bowl game. From a defensive perspective, they were one of the best defensive teams, not only in the league but in the country for a decent amount of last year. So him built, with it only being his 3rd year coming this year, it'd be interesting to see how he's able to build that program, really kind of back up to how it was before. And then number 6, we have Chris Kleiman. Did a really good job, excellent job at North Dakota State over the last few years. Interesting, he's won. I think he's 9-9 in 2 years in the conference at Kansas State, with 2 of those wins coming against Oklahoma. So he's got that feather in his cap just in terms of the big wins. But they took a bit of a nosedive towards the end of last year. They were ranked as high as I believe number 15 or number 16 in the country. Then they lost their last 5 games to finish 4-7. So we'll be see how he kind of rights that ship a little bit on the at the Kansas State level to be able to kind of get back at least to be the middle of the pack in the Big 12. Number 5, this is kind of as we get it to the top 5, it's kind of interesting to see how just to separate those two. I have Steve Sarkisian at number 5. And kind of the reasons why. Obviously, Texas is a blue blood. You kind of talked about this originally, just in terms of the brand and the kind of the reputation at Texas. When you look at Sarkisian overall as a head coach, kind of uneven at Washington. Did fairly well. Beat up on some of the teams that he was supposed to beat up on. Got beat up on by the upper echelon teams at Washington. Obviously, we know what happened at USC with the alcohol issue and the forced firing. went to Alabama as an offensive coordinator for a year. Maybe not even a year. He was the analyst there for a while, and then he was the offensive coordinator in that championship game against Clemson. Then he goes to Atlanta, doesn't perform well at all, has 2 very subpar seasons as the offensive coordinator in the NFL, then goes into Alabama where he has world-class talent at Alabama, which made him look great. So, he gets back into the head coaching at a big program like Texas. It'll be interesting to see how he's able to change that culture at Texas and, maybe turn that program around in terms of being back to a championship contender, at both the Big 12 and the national level. Number 4, we have Mike Gundy. Really kind of a coin toss for me between number 3, and number 4 for Gundy. He's got a Big 12 championship to his credit. As we have here, 83 and 55 as a Big 12 record, 137-67 overall. Really, probably the best coach in the history of the program at Oklahoma State. I think his one knock is how he performs against Oklahoma. 2-14 in his career against Oklahoma and Bedlam. Two of those wins are, well, one of them is an overtime win, and then he had the big win in 2010 in a blowout fashion. But I think the way that they play against Oklahoma is kind of indicative of how he's kind of portrayed, at least locally for the Oklahoma State fans. I think there's been a lot of talk about he kind of goes into a shell a little bit coaching against Oklahoma, and he's had some teams that probably should have competed or maybe won a few more of those games. So just for that reason, I have him at number 4. Number 3, I have Gary Patterson at TCU. Historically, TCU within the time that they've been in the Big 12 has been probably the best defensive team in the conference overall over those few years. 112-55, made a conference championship against Oklahoma a few years ago, came up short in that game, but had a really good season that year. I think the one thing that's really kind of a knock on Gary Patterson, especially over the last few years, the offense hasn't been able to equal the defense in terms of productivity. Obviously, they had a couple of really good years with Ravon Boykin at quarterback, but they really haven't been able to match that. One of the good things that he's 7-2 head-to-head against Texas in his career. So, I think that's just, from a rival perspective, that's to me what, put him at number 3 and Gundy at number 4. And then number 2, I have Matt Campbell. Honestly, Mark, you could flip a coin between Campbell and Riley. If we're being honest, the job that Campbell did, at Toledo and has done at Iowa State is remarkable. There's a reason why the last couple of years, he's been in the conversation with NFL jobs. He's been in the conversation with some of the higher tier college football jobs in the country. He just signed a 5-year extension in his contract in the offseason. It remains to be seen. I can't imagine that he will still be at Iowa State through those 5 years. But give the guy credit. He's got a style of football that he's brought to Iowa State. Seems to be a perfect fit for that team, for that program. He's not able to bring a lot of the high profile recruits to a place like Ames, Iowa. Not a great place, from a young kid's perspective, but what he's been able to do with those kids in that team and turn that around into probably what is a top 10, potentially top 5, top 7 team in 2021 has been really good. And then, number 1, Lincoln Riley, you just, with the stats, 45-8 overall, 30-5, he's won a conference championship for every year he's been a head coach at Oklahoma. He's been to the playoff multiple times. He's been, he's the only real bad thing that you could say about Riley in terms of his tenure at Oklahoma is the 2 losses to Kansas State. 2 of his 5 losses overall have been against them. He's done a good job against Texas. He's done a good job against Oklahoma State. I think the one thing, like I said, the one thing that he's consistently had over his career is, losing a game that he shouldn't, that they're much better than. So, I think that's one thing that you look, as far as us going into the future, looking at these year after year after year, is does he have the ability to win the big game, and can he, from a playoff perspective, that is, and can he, get his team to eliminate those losses against the teams that are very much inferior to Oklahoma.
The voice of college football breaking down the Big 12 with the help of Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, who just delivered his top 10, 1 through 10 coaches in the Big 12, all of the coaches in the Big 12. And I'll take my stab at it as I have throughout the years, so you can catch what my breakdown has been in the past. Also, we've released the Pac-12, the Big 10, and let's see, the ACC. So check out those videos. We've got the SEC to go. Here's my 10 through 1 rankings of Big 12 coaches, and I very much take the approach that this is how I rank them today. It's not a resume necessarily, although the resume has to come into play, because if a coach has one off year, you can't just drop him from 2 to 9 because he had an off season, especially considering the challenges of 2020. So there's a resume to be taken into consideration, but I guess the classic example would be a Joe Paterno or Bobby Bowden in their final year would be nowhere close to the best coach in college football. But if it was a legacy award, they would arguably be, in that running for the top 5. So again, this is my selection right now. And as Jason pointed out a number of times, especially at the top of this list, there's that comparison between the record and the resources and the brand and the image versus a guy that's doing it where at a level that it's never been done to that degree at Iowa State. So here we go at number 10. The other consideration I make, and I see this when I go through the other conferences, Jason, across the country, is just because I've got a guy ranked in the bottom 3 or 4 in the conference, that would give the indication that I think that he's not doing a good job. I think that there are very few coaches across the country on the Power 5 level that are not capable coaches.
Right.
It's just a difficult competitive industry, and somebody has to lose the games. So it's not as though I think any of these guys are doing a horrible job at this point. That could be the case at a few other stops across the country, but again, very few. And typically when there's a situation like an Emmett Jones, and this is a different case, but a first year or new head coach, I consider that kind of a neutral standing, and I kind of place them at a particular place where anybody below them, I don't think are meeting expectation, and everybody above them. So I may place them as high as 10th, even though they haven't coached a game, because then I'm ranking the coaches behind them or lower than them as having not met expectations or not doing the job. Not the case here, though. I do have the interim head coach, Emmett Jones, at Kansas. And as you outlined, Jason, it's just a very difficult situation he's walking into. It was just reported a few hours ago that the Kansas athletic director gave an update on where they stand in hiring a new head coach long-term. Les Miles made a few strides there. He won 3 ball games 2 years ago. Looked like they were improving. He was doing some positive things, albeit, of course, his transgressions off the field, and they were just abysmal last year and have lost 13 consecutive games. But as it stands, Emmett Jones, we know nothing about him as a head coach. Got to rank him at number 10. He's been the wide receiver and passing game coordinator there. At the number 9, I'm putting Dave Aranda there. And the last statement I made about ranking coaches who are not meeting expectations lower than a first year coach, I almost did that with Dave Aranda. I almost ranked him number 10 because of the 2-7 at Baylor, coming off the Big 12 championship game appearance the year before.
Yeah.
But to your line of thinking, I looked at the 2-7, and they were competitive across the board. They did have the big letdown the last game of the season, as you mentioned, pandemic related, really understaffed, undermanned, and blown out by Oklahoma State. But other than that, they were in every game seriously, like 38-31 against Iowa State, just one score away from a lot of wins there. So 2-7 for Dave Aranda. Difficult first year situation for him at Baylor, stepping into a new job, new conference, and then under the circumstances of the pandemic. Here's a guy that I had anticipated rating higher. You mentioned a good run at Utah State, his alma mater. It's not quite as good when I looked back on it as I thought. He peaked out at a 10-3 and 11-2. He did have some downer years at 5-7 and 3-9, but did a lot with Utah State football. They went to bowl games. They were extremely competitive in the Mountain West. Yeah, Texas Tech has not been good. That's a 5-13 mark in 2 years. And I think of Texas Tech as a difficult place to win. But Mike Leach, at the same time, he finished ranked in the top 25 5 of his last 6 years. I still think that's an astonishing achievement, because today, if you think about Texas Tech finishing in the top 25, people would be like, wow, that guy did an amazing job. Well, Mike Leach did it 5 out of his last 6 years there. So again, Matt Wells, I think he's a fully capable coach, but Texas Tech not winning right now in the Big 12. We'll see what we got for 2021. I'm going with Sark at number 7, because I just don't think he did a great job at USC or Washington. You outlined the issues at USC. He had a 9-4 season. He was 3-2 the next year, and then off the field issues led to his ouster. But he took over a really bad program at Washington. So to his credit, he lifted them to basic mediocrity. And then Chris Peterson took over and led them to the top of the Pac-12 college football playoff appearances. And basically they were the best program in the Pac-12. So his successor did a better job than he did at Washington. His predecessor and his successor did a better job, albeit a limited sample size, at USC. So I don't see where the track record is there to rank him any higher than that, although he does have this opportunity now with all the money and resources in the world to set the world on fire. So we will see what he can do. But based on what he's done thus far, I've got him at number 7. At number 6 in the Big 12, I go to Chris Kleiman. Just an outstanding run at North Dakota State. Obviously, it was just ridiculous to look at his record. He won 4 national championships in 5 years. They barely lost a game. He comes to Kansas State, and he was another guy that I thought about ranking a little bit lower. And then I looked at Bill Snyder's final 2 years at Kansas State, and they were pretty much the same record as Chris Kleiman. And so if Bill Snyder was at that level, then that's good enough for me, who I rank as one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game. And it's a small sample size, but he's not done anything egregiously horrible there, and going 9-9 in the Big 12. Yeah, a downer at the close of 2020 and 2 wins over Oklahoma. At the number 5 position, I really like Neil Brown. The record's not ultra impressive at West Virginia, but he is coming off a 6-4 campaign, including a bowl win. And the defense has improved markedly under him. Comes in from Troy. They were really bad when he took over Troy. They were 21-5 his last 2 years at Troy, and 14-2 in the conference. Beat LSU. The guy can coach. I think he's doing really good things at West Virginia, and the trajectory is headed up for Neil Brown at West Virginia. Mike Gundy. I've got him at the same position you do, but maybe I'm not quite as high on Mike Gundy. So he took over Oklahoma State from Les Miles, who basically built the program to a certain extent, lifted it to a fairly prominent place in the conference, where Oklahoma State had generally not done anything for decades. And Mike Gundy took it over. There was a time there, 2010, 2011, it looked like he was going to break through to make this a perennial top 10 team. They went 23-3 back-to-back seasons, top 10 finishes, Fiesta Bowl game against Stanford, 2 excellent campaigns. And since then, they've just kind of leveled off. They're still good, but I generally think of Oklahoma State finishing in the top 25. They've finished in the top 25 5 of the last 9 years. So about half the time. He's got to be one of the more comfortable coaches in the country. I know it's a difficult job being a head college football coach, making $3 or $4 million a year and having pressure to win, but he probably has less of it than just about anybody else. It seems like he's in a good place where if he goes 8-4, everybody's fine. there's not much going to be said. He's been there forever. And again, a 17th year. I am impressed by his Big 12 record at 83-55. But again, over the last 9 years, it's pretty much been 7-5, 8-4 every year. So Gundy at 4 for me. I rated this guy as the best coach in the Big 12 3 or 4 years ago. I don't think he's really lost anything, but to your point, he's not found a quarterback since Trevon Boykin, and that's been a huge issue because you have to keep up in that league. The work that he did prior to joining the Big 12, he took over a really good program from Dennis Franchione, but he raised it to pretty much, along with Boise State, to be the class of the group of 5 in 3 different conferences. Then there was an adjustment period when they first entered the Big 12. He only went 6-12 his first 2 years in the Big 12, but that was quickly transitioned. And the last run of years has not been overly impressive. I had the numbers here somewhere, but anyway, they're like a couple games over 500 here in the last few years, 35-27, 1 game over 500 the last 5 years in the Big 12. So since the 2017 championship game, not a great run, but they look to do maybe some damage here coming up. And again, a dominant program in the group of 5, and they've adjusted well to the Big 12 and been one of the better programs in the conference. And again, he is a mainstay at 21 years. All right, my final 2, and this is pretty much the big drama here. And the flip of the coin this time went Matt Campbell's way. So I've got Lincoln Riley at 2. What can you really say? He took over an elite program, and the impressive part of the job that he's done for me is fixing the defense. So they were elite before he got there. Bob Stoops is an all-time great coach, but man, they struggled on defense for a long time, and he's really addressed it. He found the right guy, apparently, and he's addressed that side of the ball. And, of course, all we're waiting for are wins in the college football playoff. But besides that, just a tremendous coach, known for his offensive genius, and who can argue with 45-8. It's right there with Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama in terms of an overall record since he's been there. And again, you're judging. It's not like you're judging a guy doing a great job at Texas versus a great guy doing a great job at Oklahoma. Like if this was 15 years ago, judging Bob Stoops and Mac Brown, then we've got an apples versus apples comparison. But here we've got the classic apples versus oranges. And I'm going to go with Matt Campbell here at number 1, just considering they were 8-28 the 3 previous seasons to when he took over. And it's just a string of 2, 3, and 4 wins forever for the most part, before he took over. And I was waiting to see if 7-5, 8-4 was the ceiling, but it looks like they possibly could be breaking through. I don't want to blow the 2020 season out of proportion, because they had a really good season. They won the Fiesta Bowl. They almost won the Big 12 championship, but it was 1 year, and they still lost 3 games. It's not like they went undefeated or anything. So I am curious to see if he's going to keep them in that serious Big 12 title contention status most years, because they're still not recruiting well by the rankings. They're obviously recruiting well because he's making them players out of the guys that he's recruiting. But in terms of the recruiting rankings, it's still like 55 or 60 in the country. Yeah. But the product on the field is remarkable. And of course, he is up for just about any job opening that becomes vacant at the elite level. So there's my list, which is once I got yours, I thought, they're pretty comparable.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's very interesting talking about Matt Campbell is he's going to be dealing with something this year at Iowa State that he's never had to deal with, and that's expectations. To your point, how well they had, how good of a season they had in 2020, and they're returning 21 of 22 starters off of a team. I mean, to your point, that last 3 games handled Oregon fairly easily in the Fiesta Bowl, and you mentioned came very close to beating Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. So they always seem to struggle against a team early on, a non-conference team. And so, yes, the expectations are there. I would expect, almost assuredly, they'll be preseason top 10. If they're not top 10, they're certainly probably top 12 with the amount of production that they have back. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see for one, for this year, the first year that this has happened, how does he and the overall team deal with these expectations?
Absolutely. Leave your selections for Big 12 coaches rankings down in the comments section below. Let Jason and I know where we missed it. I'm sure many of you will. But those are our selections, 10 all the way up to number 1 in the Big 12. And again, check out the videos that I've released on the ACC, the Big 10, and the Pac-12. Guess I got to do the SEC now. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Thanks a lot, Mark.